4 million years ago, the world was not built for us. It was a place of endless storms, prowling predators, and landscapes where survival was never guaranteed. Each sunrise meant both opportunity and danger. A missed hunt could mean starvation. A single wound could mean death. And yet, humanity endured. Not through strength alone, but through fire, unity, and the relentless will to adapt. Every scar etched into the bones of our ancestors tells a story of struggle and defiance. This is not the tale of kings or empires. It is the story of fragile bands of hunters and gatherers who defied extinction and carved the first path toward civilization.
The island that listened once, a forgotten island slept beneath the gray waters of the Chesapeake. Then one man heard its pulse and woke-eyed. Rain had been the only honest clock in Elijah Brooks's life for weeks. It kept the same remorseless time as it drummed on the corrugated awning of Brooks Auto and Marine. And when it slackened, time slackened too. The shop smelled of oil and damp cardboard and the faint mildew that settles into places that have stopped making money. Half the tools were under tarps. The other half were in little piles that meant for sale if anyone ever came to ask. He watched the street from the open bay door, a mug of cold coffee untouched at his elbow, and tried not to think about the rooms he no longer slept in. The house had become too wide after Lena's laugh went quiet. He had been a sailor before he became a mechanic, years in the Navy, then coastal repair contracts, so he knew the way storms sound in your bones. Grief had a similar tone, a humming in the ribs, a pressure behind the eyes. You learn to steer around it or you drown. On the morning the rain became a mist, he opened his old laptop for no real reason besides habit and the avoidance of silence. The municipal auction site was a museum of the unwanted, condemned lots, impounded cars with missing keys, storage units with the word abandoned in shaky caps. He scrolled with the dull curiosity of a man pawing through a stranger's junk drawer until the entry that didn't make sense. Island for sale, 3.1 acres, uninhabited, Chesapeake Bay. Price, $1. Buyer must sign in person. There was no photograph, just a pin stuck in blue water east of Kent County and a parcel number that looked like a mistake. He checked the posting date. 2 weeks old. Still there. He clicked to enlarge the map, and the teardrop of land appeared like a breath mark in a sentence, surrounded by marsh and shallow channels. Parcel 17B, abandoned property. The notion should have felt like a joke, the kind you tell on late-night call-in shows. Men are selling islands for $1 now. That's how the world ends. But the word island put a clean distance in his mind. A boundary without neighbors, without pity. A place big enough for silence that didn't ache like an empty room. He printed the form. The county clerk looked at him the way people look at an engine that rattles in a new way, mostly curiosity, with some foreknowledge of trouble. "You know, nobody keeps that place," she said, stamping the paper. "No power, no dock, no reason to stay. Birds don't even land there." "Then maybe it finally found the right kind of owner," Elijah said, and slid a single dollar through the glass. 2 days later, he bought a ride out with an old bayman named Clyde, $50 and a bottle of rye that had been gathering dust behind Elijah's register. Dawn came as a gray smear over the water. Fog climbed the gunnels and made the world inside the boat feel like a room with shrinking walls. The outboard coughed and settled into a rhythm that made conversation optional. "You really bought it?" Clyde asked eventually, not turning his head. The brim of his cap had a salt crease like a shoreline. "Paperwork's right here." Elijah tapped the folder on his duffel. Tools, a tent, a portable stove, a coil of rope, a small generator he hated but trusted, enough to see what $1 bought. The last fella came back in 2 days. Clyde spat into the water. Didn't say a word. Moved inland. Some say he heard things. "Wind," Elijah said, because if it wasn't wind, then it was the sea, and the sea was a language he respected. The island arrived by degrees. First the darker patch and fog, then the line of broken pines like a crooked comb, then the shore, a narrow scab of gray sand with stones protruding like knuckles. Clyde throttled down. The mist thinned enough for Elijah to make out the interior, tougher and more tangled than it looked from the water. It reminded him of the underside of a deck he'd once crawled through in a storm. Cramped, necessary, unnegotiable. "End of the line," Clyde said. "You sure you want to stay? I'll radio if I need a pickup. Don't wait too long." The kind of sentence that pretends to be a favor and is actually a warning. Elijah stepped onto the beach and felt the island's first unkind truth. No give to the sand, just a wet hardness that kept a man on the surface. He hauled the duffel above the wash line, waved to Clyde, and listened to the outboard fade until the water and the fog and the quiet had the same voice. Silence is not a single thing. The kind on the island wasn't emptiness or peace. It felt like the hush around a held breath. No gulls, no insects. Wind moved the reeds, but even that made sound in the throat rather than the ear, a dry sibilance like grass reading a secret to itself. He pitched camp shallow, close enough to the tide to hear its judgment, far enough to save his feet at night, and ate canned beans because they were hot and tasted of effort. The rest of the day he spent clearing a path inland. The undergrowth fought as if it had been hired to keep people out. Brambles punished his wrist, vines threw loops around his ankles, and more than once the machete rang against stone. The work made a clean place in his head. Swing, step, drag. Breathe, listen, choose the next branch to remove. When he stopped at dusk and looked back, he had made perhaps 30 feet of corridor through the green barricade. It felt like the right scale of victory, small and true. Darkness came without the familiar light dome of a city. Night fell all the way down. His fire braided itself into the wind and disappeared. Waves talked to the beach in phrases, and between them the island held its breath again. He slept as a man sleeps inside new walls, alert with his hand on the zipper. Fog brought morning in close and put the trees at touching distance. He resumed the cut toward a slight rise at the island's center, keeping the ocean on his left through smell and a thin, constant roar. He found artifacts of someone else's attempt, a rusted chain half swallowed by roots, a squared stone where no squared stone should be, an iron hinge that a tree had embraced and then forgotten. The place wore its past the way ships wear paint, layers hidden under layers, color bleeding through. By late afternoon, the machete struck something that was not wood and not ordinary stone. The vibration traveled up his arm like a tuning fork. He cleared with both hands, and a shock of bronze looked back at him from the dirt, the green of long patience encrusting the edges. Letters emerged one by one under his thumb, the way old names come back in dreams. For the Brooks Who Dares, J.B., 1912. He said nothing for a long space because the sentence had already said enough. His mouth found a bitter taste. Metal, memory, or both. Brooks was the kind of name you don't think about until it appears in metal under your hand. J.B. Drew aligned to a half-told story from childhood. A James or a Jacob, or a man too stubborn for his own good, who had scattered pride and trouble behind him in equal handfuls. His father had avoided the tale as if it had a bill attached. Elijah cleaned the plate with the care he gave to seized bearings, slow, circular, respectful of the invisible. The bronze sat in a stone frame, edges sealed with something that had outlived its maker. When he rapped the slab with the machete's flat, the reply was not the dull thud of earth, but a hollow, contained echo. A room under a room. He felt it then, the smallest ripple underfoot, not motion exactly, but suggestion, as if the island had shifted one shoulder and decided not to wake all the way. He told himself it was the body's trick at the end of work, the way a ladder will seem to sway after you step off. He still believed the lie when night came. He believed it through the first hour of dark. He did not believe it when he woke to the sensation that something below him had exhaled. The fire had collapsed into a red vow. He held his breath to hear better and discovered there was nothing to hear. No wind, no wave, until there was the faintest hum, far down under the slab, so low it might have been the feeling of sound rather than sound itself. He lay back with his palms flat on the ground and the hum met his pulse in the middle. In the morning, the mist had the look of decision. He made coffee, strong enough to argue with, and returned to the clearing with a shovel and crowbar. The stone around the bronze was harder than logic, but not invincible. He tapped a ring around the seam, testing for weak place, and found one at the southwest corner, a deeper note that gave him hope and blister both. An hour into the work, he paused to drink and noticed a glint an arm's length from the slab, a curve of glass under leaf mold. He dug it free with his fingers, a bottle with a collar of red wax, its cork intact by stubbornness alone. The glass distorted the paper inside, but handwriting is its own kind of light. He sat on his heels and twisted until the wax flaked into his lap, and the cork came out with a sigh that did not belong to air so long kept. The paper was brittle but legible, 2 sheets folded like an apology. The first line found him where he lived. If you are reading this, then time has found the right man. He read every word twice, then a third time, lips moving as if the sentences might feel the shape of his mouth and recognize him. James Brooks, 1912, engineer and sailor, a machine that takes power from the sea. They stole the design. They called me traitor. I buried the true one. The island remembers our hands. The key to its heart lies with the stone. Elijah set the paper on his knee and looked at the bronze with new eyes, then at his hands with older ones. The old shame he had carried for the family myth, that someone back there had done a thing that bent the necks of the men who came after, moved in his chest and stood up straighter. Shame can turn to kinship with one letter changed. He widened the clearing until the pattern showed itself. The big slab with the bronze plaque was not alone. 3 smaller stones stood in a rough arc, their faces scored with marks that might once have been letters before weather taught them humility. The ground between them was not the same ground as the rest of the island. It was darker, looser, like fill. When he pressed his ear to the big slab and closed his eyes, the world became his heartbeat and something beneath it, slower, older. He worked until evening gave up and the light thinned to a color that means stop. His palms had raised ridges that would turn to scabs and then to tougher skin. He ate without tasting and watched the horizon lose its edges. The ocean had 3 voices, lap, hush, and draw, and he could now hear the space between them. In that space lived the hum. He slept in pieces and woke from each with a sense that a man in a salt-stiff coat had just spoken his name in a tone used for sons. At first light, when the wind hadn't chosen a direction yet, he returned with the crowbar and patience. He tapped around the rim until the mortar crumbled in a gray beard that softened his boots. He set the bar, leaned his weight, and felt the slab give the smallest courtesy, half a finger's width, then settle again. He fetched driftwood to hold any gain. He worked the bar deeper. The stone argued, then complained, then, with a sound like a drawer opening after a lifetime closed, lifted enough to let a vein of cold air touch his face. It carried a smell that was not soil, oil, metal, the sterile breath of places left alone on purpose. He lowered the slab carefully, not from fear of what was below, but from respect. He used the last of the morning to rig a simple block and tackle from a pine and a length of rope he'd meant for something else. Nothing fancy, just enough to make the next inch of movement possible without asking his back to sponsor the enterprise single-handedly. He spent the afternoon in preparation, the kind sailors know and civilians call fussing. He stowed the letter in a dry bag, checked his flashlight, tested the generator he despised for its noise, inventoried his tools by touching each and saying its name. He told the island aloud what he aimed to do because it felt right to ask a door to pardon the knock before you knock it down. Dusk came with a clarity that wasn't weather. Clouds thinned and the bay showed its long muscles. He sat at the edge of his clearing, the bronze plate catching what light was left. He read for the Brooks, who dares again and heard it new. Not a challenge this time, but a welcome with teeth. He slept facing the slab, boots on, as if he might have to stand up inside a dream and finish the job before it could escape. In that half-sleep he saw a stair going down into cold, and the suggestion of a room where a machine breathed like a tide pool. He didn't see the machine, only the discipline of it, the clean lines, the sense that someone had made choices and none of them were lazy. When he woke, the sky was the pale color that makes metal look honest. He stood, stretched sore shoulders, and stepped to the rig. The rope took the weight as if it had been waiting. The slab rose, slowly, grudging and graceful. Cool air washed his face, then his chest, then his knees. Darkness opened like a mouth, brick-throated, dry-breathed, wide enough for one man to step inside and discover what his dollar had actually purchased. Not land, but the end of a silence. And terrify. He set the slab back a hand's width to rest and turned off the generator so the morning sound would be only tide, wind, and his own breathing. He picked up the flashlight and the letter, and as the beam found the first tread below, he understood the shape of what came next. The plan, if it could be called a plan, was simple and whole. Descend, listen, and prove that what a century had buried could still choose its heir. He stood on the lip a last moment, palm flat to the bronze plate, and spoke to the metal that held his name. "All right, old man," he said. "I'm here." Then Elijah Brooks took the first careful step down. The steps descended in a gentle curve, the air cooling with every foot. Elijah's flashlight beam slid across bricks blackened by moisture and the stubborn breath of time. Each brick bore a maker's mark, small crescents and initials, as though the men who had built this place had been proud enough to sign their work even underground. Dust glittered like drowned stars in the beam, then vanished again. He counted 20 steps before his boots met a floor of poured concrete. The chamber opened before him, a space roughly the size of his workshop back in Baltimore, but cleaner in its geometry. Pipes climbed the walls like veins frozen in metal, feeding toward the center where a great form waited under the remains of a rotted tarp. The smell was dry oil and ancient brass. He pulled the tarp aside. The machine was nothing he had ever seen, yet everything his instincts recognized. A body built for rhythm, for turning motion into meaning. Its core was a glass cylinder thicker than his arm, surrounded by copper coils that wound in precise spirals. Valves studded the base, and two great fins of polished steel arched from either side like wings caught mid-fold. A placard, greened with age, clung to the base. Hydrocore Engine. Property of Brooks Maritime Engineering. Patent pending. 1912. The letters Brooks looked different here. Less like family, more like prophecy. He walked around the machine slowly, tracing the path of wires that led toward a small generator assembly bolted into the wall. A metal cabinet stood nearby, half-eaten by rust. Inside were notebooks, stacks of them, wrapped in oilcloth. The uppermost bore a nameplate, James Brooks, Chief Engineer. Elijah sat on the cold floor, careful with the brittle binding, and opened the first. The handwriting slanted like a man leaning into wind. Diagrams, equations, sketches of turbines and chambers filled the pages. Between them, sentences appeared like confessions. They will not understand. They will think it steals the sea's heart, but it only listens. If I fail, let the next Brooks remember. Energy is not taken. It is answered. He turned a page and found a drawing of the very island, marked with cross-sections and notes on pressure dynamics. Lines ran outward from the center toward the shore, labeled conduits. It dawned on him that the entire island had been engineered, not just the chamber. Every root and rock might be part of a buried system built to feed this heart of metal and glass. The thought left him both proud. He set up the portable generator, a habit older than caution. The cable sparked once before seated properly. Lights flickered inside the hydrocore's glass chamber, catching on layers of sediment. Tiny, pearlescent scales suspended like dust in water. When the hum came, it wasn't mechanical. It felt deeper, as though the air itself remembered a song. "Easy," he whispered, as though speaking to a living thing. The hum strengthened, then steadied. The copper coils brightened faintly, not with electricity but with a soft phosphorescence that traced the spiral paths of water caught inside. He realized, horrified and awed, that the machine wasn't dry. It was breathing seawater through some hidden intake, using it as both medium and messenger. The notebook described resonance alignment, the process of syncing the engine's frequency to the natural pulse of tidal cycles. Elijah adjusted the old dials by touch, cross-referencing numbers scrawled in the margins. Every change deepened the tone until the concrete floor itself began to tremble like skin sensing thunder. He cut the generator abruptly. Silence hit with weight. But beneath it lingered a pulse. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats again, steady as a heart. He sat back against the wall and let the sound work through him. The rational part of his mind cataloged what he'd seen. Pressure differentials, hydrodynamic conduction, energy conversion without combustion. The other part, the older sailor part, knew the truth. The island was alive, and his ancestor had given it lungs. When he climbed back to the surface, the sun had already slanted west, turning the fog into rivers of light. He could feel the pulse faintly through his boots, matching the ebb of the tide. The bronze plaque caught the light and glowed like a watchful eye. He made camp closer to the hatch that night. The letter from James lay beside him, its edges soft from handling. The island remembers our hands. He wondered how long memory could last in stone and salt. Sleep came unevenly. Dreams drifted between water and machinery. his wife's face reflected in copper, the hum rising behind her voice until words became vibration. He woke before dawn with tears on his temples and the sense that someone had called his name from below. He descended again after sunrise, driven by a mechanic's hunger to know why. The notebooks revealed more each time, pages alternating between calculations and fragments of something almost spiritual. James had written of a principle he called reciprocal force, energy gained without taking, drawn through harmony with the ocean's motion. The sea does not resist. It yields, and in yielding, gives power. At the last pages, the handwriting broke into haste. Lines curved violently, ink smeared by water. They mean to seize it. They think it a weapon. I will hide what they cannot unmake. If a Brooks finds this, remember, do not claim it. Complete it. The final words trailed into a dark line that ended with the print of a thumb, or maybe blood. Elijah closed the book with reverence. The machine stood silent but expectant, as though waiting for him to finish the sentence left a century undone. He returned topside to gather tools, spare wiring, clamps, insulated gloves. The day had sharpened. Wind carried the smell of rain again. He thought of calling Clyde, of leaving the island for supplies and clearer thoughts, but something in the pulse beneath the ground felt too immediate to abandon. He worked through the afternoon, mapping every conduit visible through the soil. By evening, he'd discovered 2 more vents near the western bluff, disguised as natural fissures. When he held his ear to them, he could hear the low sigh of air moving in rhythm with the tide. He realized then that the hydrocore was still faintly active, drawing minimal energy through the old system. The implications churned in him. If he could stabilize the cycle, he might restore full operation, a self-sustaining power source untouched by combustion or decay. The kind of thing governments and corporations would kill to own. That night, lightning stitched the horizon. He sat under the awning of his tent, staring toward the sea. The hum from below rose with the storm, sinking to the thunder as if the machine were answering. When the first sheet of rain struck, the ground beneath his feet quivered in response. He understood then what James must have felt, awe that bordered on fear. The storm lasted hours. At its height, a flash illuminated the clearing, and for an instant Elijah saw light bleeding through the cracks around the slab, blue-white, liquid, alive. The hum became a note so pure it ached in his bones. Then the power died, and darkness fell absolute. He waited until morning before checking the site. The slab was warm to the touch. A faint trail of vapor drifted from the seam, carrying the clean metallic scent of deep water. The hydrocore had awakened, at least for a moment, tasting the modern world. Elijah packed the notebooks and the letter into a waterproof case. He needed to tell someone, but who could he trust with a miracle? The memory of his wife's faith in him returned, gentle and accusing. You always fix what you find broken. By noon, he had made his choice. He would finish the repair, document everything, and then share it openly. Secrets had already cost his family a century. Transparency might be the only protection left. He sealed the hatch, marked coordinates on his phone, and looked once more at the plaque gleaming under the new sun. The hum was gone, replaced by the lazy hush of surf. But when he turned to leave, he felt the faintest vibration in the air, a promise rather than an echo. Somewhere below, the island's heart had remembered its rhythm, and it was waiting for him to return. He left it first light when the tide turned slack and the bay made a flat gray mirror of the sky. The radio call to Clyde was brief. Coordinates, a time, the promise of cash. No explanations. Men like Clyde did not want explanations that might become testimonies. The island receded into fog, but Elijah felt its pull in his ribs as surely as if a line still ran from the shore to the boat's cleat. Baltimore looked different after the island, too loud in color, too quick in gesture. He walked the aisles of the hardware store like a man shopping for organs. Copper couplings, high-pressure hose, epoxy rated for saltwater immersion, conductive grease, dielectric grease, thread sealant. He bought gasket material and a tube bender, a handful of valves he did not strictly need, and gloves thick enough to make a lineman nod. At the electrical supply, he asked for marine-grade cable, ring lugs, a breaker box with no pre-cut sin. His cart drew stares that slid off him like rain off oiled canvas. At the counter, the clerk squinted at the stack. Boatyard rebuild? Something like that. Storm season'll chew you up. Already has. He paid cash. The receipts went into a plastic envelope that became heavier than paper should be. On the way out, he stopped at a thrift shop on impulse and found a battered tool chest with the kind of shallow drawers that make a mind orderly. He bought a few LED work lights, a cheap camera that took decent video, and a small handheld spectrum meter because a note in James's book had mentioned wavelengths as if color itself were a measurement of power. On the street, wind smelled of rain and fried food. Somewhere, a saxophone worked the same 4 notes into different truths. Back at the marina, Clyde pretended not to notice the surplus of wire and the sheen of new copper. "Weather's in a mood," he said, eyeing the bruise of clouds offshore. "So am I," Elijah replied. They ran light and low across the bay, the boat slapping out a rhythm his spine would remember. Twice he looked back, expecting to see a flotilla of patrol craft chasing the glow he had witnessed in the storm. Only gulls followed, scissoring the air like impatient hands. The island met him with the same held breath, but now he could hear the difference between silence and listening. He hauled crates above the reach of the tide and rigged a pulley from the sturdy pine over the hatch. The slab's mass surrendered to rope and leverage. The stair swallowed his light like a throat. He descended with the careful joy of a man returning to a secret that had not soured overnight. The chamber was as he had left it, clean, concentrated, waiting. He set the new lamps around the periphery, banishing the shadows that hid just enough detail to make mistakes. The hydrocore's coils had dulled to their old tarnish. The glass heart was clear again. The suspended flecks settled as if asleep. He stood with a hand on the frame the way he had once steadied the hulls of damaged boats. "We're going to do this right," he said, and surprised himself with the we. He began with inspection. Every joint got eyes and fingers. Every line was traced end to end. He found 3 hairline cracks in a copper run and a gasket that had perished to brittle lace. The intake manifold had a seam that had been mended once before. James's patch, neat and confident, still holding. Elijah cleaned the old satyr with wick and patience, replated the weak run, and replaced the dead gasket with one he cut by hand. He marked each fix in a notebook that would be legible to anyone, not just a Brooks. Part numbers, torque values, sequence. Midday, he powered the auxiliary pump, the hydrocore's breather, according to the notes, to flush the system with clean seawater. He expected grit, and found instead a fine shimmer, not sand, but something that caught light like powdered shell. He held a beaker of it to a lamp and watched the particles drift in deliberate spirals as if following invisible grooves. He remembered James's line, "The medium remembers." He didn't pretend to understand it, but he respected what he didn't know. He ate standing up, bread, hard cheese, water gone warm in its bottle. The chamber's temperature had dropped 2 degrees since morning, which made no sense and every kind of sense at once. The spectrum meter, a toy by comparison with the machine before him, nonetheless registered a gentle shift toward the blue end when he brought it near the glass cylinder. He wrote it down anyway. Even bad instruments tell part of the truth. By late afternoon, he had mapped a safe sequence. Prime the breather, open the sluice a quarter turn. Bring the coils to pre-charge with the portable generator. Then watch the alignment dial that James had built from an old ship's inclinometer and a compass detented into new meanings. If the needle held steady at the mark labeled NEAP, the system was in phase with the gentle tide. If it drifted toward spring, the energy would surge and risk a blowout. He didn't know yet how to ride the surges. He would learn. He threw the first switch. The hum rose like a throat clearing. Water moved, felt, not heard, and the faintest glow braided the coils. He watched the alignment needle tremble and settle. He fed power in small sips, counting 3 at each dial, hands steady the way they had been the first time he took a ship out of harbor. The note deepened. The floor vibrated. The glass cylinder brightened until he could see his reflection broken into concentric rings. A whisper of steam made him turn. A pinhole leak beaded at a pressure joint, not catastrophic, but honest. He cut the power, closed the sluice, bled off the line. The room exhaled with him. He silver soldered the bead, cooled it slow, ran a gloved thumb over the seam until the skin knew what the eye couldn't. Again. The second run held longer. He brought the coils to what the notes called approach, a harmonic cusp where small changes made large answers. The blue in the glass became a living thing, a tide trapped in a circle, and for a dangerous moment he forgot to be afraid. Then a valve at the base coughed, the sort of dry metallic bark that precedes failure. He killed power faster than thought. A rush of seawater sloshed into the catch basin and found a hairline crack in the concrete he hadn't seen. It seeped away with the dreamy patience of old injuries. He followed the water to a hollow conduit cut into the foundation, a deliberate channel toward bedrock. Clever, he thought. When, not if, the system failed, it would bleed into the island's bones rather than flood the chamber. He made a note to thank a dead man for his worst-case thinking. He worked until the lamps made white islands on his hands. The third attempt, he told himself, would be the last of the day, whether it succeeded or scolded him. He reset, breathed, glanced at the alignment needle and whispered, "Listen." It was not a command to the machine. It was instruction to himself. He brought the system up in increments, the way you lift a sleeping child, slow, with attention on weight and breath. The coils kindled. The needle drifted toward NEAP and held. The hum layered on itself until it wasn't a single note but a chord built of time and water. The glass heart filled with a light that behaved like liquid, folding and unfolding in rhythms that matched the faint pressure changes he could feel in his inner ear. The hair on his arms rose, absurdly, like grass in a windless field. For a minute, 5, everything held. The output gauge, a round-faced instrument rebuilt from the guts of a dynamo meter, climbed past the mark James had labeled proof. Elijah could feel energy riding the rails, bolted into the chamber wall, crawling upward toward the conduits that fed the island. His lamps brightened without flicker. The air took on a slight tang, clean and metallic, the opposite of ozone. He grinned, helpless, a man taught to expect disappointment and receiving wonder instead. Then the valve that had coughed earlier decided to finish its thought. It didn't explode. This machine had been built by a man who respected consequences, but it failed open, a ragged breath that dumped pressure into the catch path. Water hissed through the seam, and the cord in the room wavered like a singer losing pitch. Elijah spun the wheel closed, thumbed the kill, and leaned his forehead against cool metal until his breath caught up to him. He laughed once, because failure that instructs is the kind of mercy mechanics pray for. He replaced the valve from his stock, reamed the seat, hand-lapped the stem with compound until it mated like a promise, and wrote "replace all base valves" in his notebook large enough that even a tired future self could not mistake it. He cleaned the floor and coiled the hoses with a sailor's neatness. Above ground waited night and a body that had earned sleep. When he shouldered the hatch aside, the sky surprised him by still being there. The storm had marched farther inland, leaving a taut silence that made small sounds carry. He heated food, forgot to eat it hot, and swallowed anyway. He was rinsing the spoon in a little basin when the new sound arrived. Not a hum, not a wave, but the mannered throat clearing of a small engine idling at the edge of hearing. He stepped into the open and saw a white shape drift out of the gray, a municipal skiff, paint clean, windshield wipers twitching. Two figures stood in yellow slickers, one with a clipboard held like a badge even before he produced the badge. "Afternoon, sir," the taller called, though it was near dark. "Department of Environmental Resources." Elijah felt a small, precise machine start up in his chest, the one that handles strangers who have paperwork. He raised a hand in what could be greeting or caution. "Evening." "We've had reports," the man said when his boots hit the sand. The other took a picture of nothing in particular, and then a picture of the slab because the eye is drawn to secrets even when covered. "Unusual light phenomenon offshore during last night's storm. Electrical. Possibly hazardous." "Storms do love a show," Elijah said. He did not smile. He didn't know yet which shape this encounter wanted. The second man, younger, pointed at the cables he had been too tired to bury before dark. "Running a generator out here?" "Temporary power," Elijah said. "I bought the parcel." Making it safe, the badge moved closer. "Ownership here is complicated. Title trust, municipal easements. We'll need to inspect any installations." Elijah's instinct was to put himself physically between them and the hatch, but the smarter voice in him said document. He lifted his phone as casually as a man checking the time and set it to record. "You're welcome to look at my camp," he said. "Anything outside of sealed ground is just tarps and rope." The taller man's eyes cut to the bronze plate and back. "We'll be back with an inspector," he said finally. "Soon." It wasn't a threat exactly. It was an announcement to the future. They left the way they had come, the skiff's wake unspooling under the last wash of light. Elijah stood until engine noise became memory. Then he went back to the hatch and laid both palms on the stone as if feeling for a pulse. The rock was cool. Below, the chamber kept its own counsel. He slept poorly and woke with the taste of bureaucratic dust in his mouth. By habit, he inventoried what he had: parts, time, a machine that wanted to be finished, and the certainty that attention had found him. Share had been the right decision, he told himself in the dawn. But when and how mattered. Secrecy had buried James. Silence would do the same to him. He spent the morning burying cable and disguising vents with stones he had no right to lift but managed anyway. He rechecked the base valves and found the last one hairline cracked as if ashamed to admit it. He replaced it and wrote, "Assume nothing" at the top of the page. He filmed the room in the slow, patient pans, speaking to the camera in the tone he used with apprentices. Name the part. Say what you know, say what you don't. Leave space for the next hand to be smarter. By afternoon, clouds had thinned to a high white rib cage. He took a long walk around the island's narrow shoulder, counting steps between vents, testing the soil with his heel until a pattern suggested itself. A star of conduits, all pointed into the chamber like compass needles agreeing at last. On the western edge he found an iron post so fused with a pine's bark it looked like a bone. He touched it and thought of hands that had driven it a century before, of how wood and iron had decided in time to be one thing. When he came back to the clearing, a gull stood on the bronze plate, bold as gossip. It watched him, cocked its head, and then lifted into the air on an invisible curve of wind. He had not seen a bird on the island before. He let the meaning of that be whatever it was, then went below to work. The fourth attempt began with a prayer he would not have called a prayer. "Let me hear it." He tuned slowly, watching the needle drift and settle, and felt the present stack on the past in sheets so thin they became one. The machine answered with a tone that was not music and not noise, but the space between them. Energy crept out through the conduits like dawn. The light in the glass deepened to the color of a bruise fading to memory. He held it there, hands steady on the controls, and understood what James had meant by reciprocal force. He was not forcing the sea to surrender anything. He was letting it complete a circuit it already meant to make. The island warmed, not in degrees, but in the way certain rooms feel full when someone you love is in them. He stayed with the machine until the dials told him he could stop, then stopped. When he climbed to the surface, the sun sat low and generous. He stood a long time at the edge of the clearing, listening to the quiet that comes after a job done as far as it can be done that day. The skiff did not return that evening, but he knew it would return, or something larger wearing its smile. The decision, then, could not be delayed. He went to his tent, took the camera, set it on the crate that had been a table, and spoke to it as if to a person he needed on his side. "My name is Elijah Brooks," he said. "If you're watching this, it means I'm about to show you something my family hid and the world lost." He told the bare facts, nothing he could not defend in daylight, and ended with the only sentence that felt true enough. "This doesn't belong to me. I'm only finishing it." He slept with the camera under his jacket and the letter from James under his pillow, as if paper could guard a man from tide and law. In the hour before dawn, the machine below sent up a note so soft it might have been imagined. He sat up in the dark and smiled into it. When the light finally came, thin and salt clean, he knew what the next step must be. He would need a witness who wasn't a badge, a voice that could speak to more people than he could reach from a sandbar. He scavenged the radio from his duffel, checked the battery, and thought of names. Only one made a shape in his mouth that felt like a future. A journalist he had seen bring complicated truths to ground without setting them on fire. He keyed the transmitter and set her name into the morning. Then he waited for the sea to carry the call where it needed to go. The reply to his radio call came at dusk the next day. A woman's voice, quick and low, the kind of tone that expects interruption. "This is Ava Carter." "Who's calling?" Elijah took a breath before speaking. "Elijah Brooks." "You don't know me. I have something you'll want to see. Mr. Brooks, you're going to have to be more specific. Reporters get that line about 40 times a week. It's about energy. Renewable energy. A machine my great-grandfather built before the First World War. It works. It's on an island in the Chesapeake. They'll try to shut it down if I don't show it to the right person." Silence hissed through the channel, then, "You're serious." "As serious as it gets." I can be there tomorrow morning, she said finally. Text me coordinates. He powered off the radio and watched the horizon bleed from blue to ash. The island's hum deepened underfoot, steady, patient, as if it approved. Morning came clear and windless. A small news skiff nosed into the shallows, white hull cut in the mirror of the bay. Ava Carter stepped out barefoot to save her shoes, camera slung from one shoulder, hair tied back in a way that announced she disliked waste, of time, of words, of opportunity. You weren't kiddin', she said, scanning the beach. No dock, no birds, no welcome mat. Welcome mat's under repair. He led her through the trail, vines clutching their pant legs until they reached the clearing. The bronze plaque winked through sunlight like an old coin. What's that? She asked. Proof my family's been crazy longer than most. He pried the slab open, lowering the hatch to reveal the stair. Careful, slick in spots. The descent stole the light quickly. Ava's flashlight beam danced on the walls, catching the old tool marks. How deep are we? 22 feet. She exhaled a small sound, half awe, half calculation, and then they stepped into the chamber. Oh my God, she whispered. The hydrocore stood in the center like something born, not built. The light from her lamp turned its coils into a sculpture of fire and patience. This is what you called about? This and what it does. He showed her the notebooks, the diagrams, the faint heartbeat of blue still sleeping in the glass cylinder. She moved closer, camera humming, every frame a witness. You're telling me this thing generates power from tides? From harmony, he said. From listening to the ocean instead of forcing it. Listening, she echoed, voice softer now. You sound like him. Who? Every inventor who ever scared the people in charge. They spent the day documenting everything. Measurements, readings, even the subtle vibration underfoot. Ava's questions were sharp but never mocking. When he explained the principle of reciprocal force, she nodded, eyes narrowing with thought. You're saying this could replace fossil generation entirely? Maybe not replace. Reroute. It's cleaner, self-regulating, no fuel, no waste. And you've told no one else? 2 bureaucrats showed up yesterday, said they'd be back with an inspector. You saw what's written on the plaque. It's waiting for a Brooks who dares. Guess I'm out of excuses. As evening pressed close, she uploaded a handful of stills through her satellite link. If I don't file something, they'll think I fell off the map, she explained. But I won't publish until you say so. The air around them thickened, heavy with salt and potential. It's waking up again, Elijah murmured. The hum built in the walls, low at first, then spreading through the concrete like breath under skin. The glass core began to glow, the suspended flecks rising and swirling in new patterns. Ava's camera caught the moment the light touched her face, a mixture of terror and wonder. Elijah, she said quietly, you realize you've just rewritten physics? I just fixed what my great-grandfather started. The hum sharpened, dials twitched, lights flared. He shut down the generator, but the glow remained, self-sustaining. The hydrocore had found its rhythm, synced to the tide beyond the walls. For the first time since he'd opened the hatch, Elijah felt not alone but accompanied. By the sea, by the machine, by the ghost of James Brooks. Then the lights flickered. Ava frowned. Is it supposed to... The rest of her sentence vanished in the sudden crack of something heavy striking metal above them. Dust sifted from the ceiling. Elijah grabbed her wrist. Upstairs. Now. They emerged into the clearing to find 3 men in city maintenance jackets standing by the hatch. Behind them, a skiff bristling with antennas idled in the shallows. The tall inspector from before looked up, expression unreadable. "Told you we'd be back," he said. "This is private property. It's government property now." The man produced a folded paper, official seals gleaming. "By order of the State Energy Commission, all experiments and unauthorized structures on tidal land are subject to immediate seizure." Ava raised her camera. "Care to repeat that for the record?" He glared. "Turn that off." "Freedom of the press," she said sweetly, "still applies offshore." Elijah stepped between them. "You don't want to do this. The system down there isn't dangerous, but it's sensitive. You shut it down wrong, you could—" A metallic whine cut him off. One of the workers had leaned over the hatch and pulled the main lever, mistaken it for a latch. The hum from below pitched higher, frantic. Blue light shot through the seams, licking across the stone like veins of fire. The inspector staggered back. "What the hell is that?" "Back off!" Elijah shouted, diving to the hatch. He cranked the valve, forcing the lever back into position. The glow subsided to a trembling heartbeat. His own pulse matched it. "You nearly cooked the core." The inspector's face blanched. "You said it wasn't dangerous." "It isn't, unless you treat it like a fuse box." Ava kept filming, voice calm despite her shaking hands. "I think you just proved his point." The men retreated to their skiff, muttering into radios. When the last echo of their engine faded, night returned, carrying a strange new quiet. "They'll be back with more people," Ava said. "This story won't stay secret long. Then we make sure it's told right." She studied him, then nodded. "You trust me that much?" "I trust the machine less. It wants to be seen." She smiled, thin, fierce. "Tomorrow we show them everything." He barely slept. Each hour brought new tremors through the ground, faint but regular, as though the island itself was adjusting to some deeper rhythm. He checked the gauges before dawn. The hydrocore remained stable, humming softly like a heart between beats. When Ava woke, she uploaded her footage to multiple cloud archives. "If they confiscate my gear, at least the story lives somewhere." "Good," Elijah said, "because once this goes out, no one can bury it again." Outside, the tide was rising fast, curling foam around the rocks like white signatures. The island vibrated faintly, alive and aware. By noon, they saw boats on the horizon, 2 research vessels, 1 Coast Guard cutter, sunlight flashing on lenses and masts. Ava pressed record, eyes steady. "Elijah," she said quietly, "this is the part where the world starts listening." He looked toward the horizon, toward the legacy buried under his feet, and smiled. "Then, let's make sure it hears the truth." The sea answered with a single long breath, the kind that comes before a wave. Below them, the hydrocore began to sing. The world arrived not as a conversation, but as a storm. By midday, the horizon bristled with ships, government research vessels, media boats, drones buzzing overhead like metallic insects. The island, that had been nothing but a forgotten dot on a map, now glared under lenses and spotlights. Elijah watched from the clearing, one hand on the bronze plaque, the other shading his eyes. Ava stood beside him, camera ready, her jaw tight. "They're early," she said. "They were always coming," he replied. The hum beneath their boots had changed overnight. Slower, deeper, almost cautious. The hydrocore seemed to sense the attention above, like an animal retreating to its den. Elijah felt the pulse against his soles, steady but waiting. "Signal's strong," Ava murmured, checking her uplink. "Everything we've recorded is already mirrored across 6 servers. If they shut us down now, it's too late." "That's what I was counting on." The first skiff grounded at the beach. The inspector, no longer in yellow slicker, now in a dark government windbreaker, led a small army of technicians, soldiers, and legal representatives. They carried cables, scanners, sealed crates, the language of control. Cameras followed them like shadows. "Elijah Brooks," the inspector called up the slope, "you are to vacate the premises immediately. This island and all materials upon it are now under federal investigation. Elijah didn't move. It's not a crime to listen to the sea." "This isn't about poetry, sir. You're interfering with classified infrastructure." "Classified? You didn't even know it existed." A murmur rolled through the onlookers. Ava stepped forward, her camera locked on the inspector. "This machine produces clean, renewable energy. No combustion, no emissions. Why classify salvation?" "Because it's unstable," the man snapped. "We detected anomalous electromagnetic activity, dangerous to navigation and communications." "We're shutting it down. You touch it wrong," Elijah said quietly, "and you'll trigger a surge that could flood every conduit in the bay. That's a risk we'll manage." He saw the decision made before it happened. 2 technicians moved toward the hatch, unspooling heavy insulated wire. Elijah lunged, but a soldier intercepted him, hand firm on his shoulder. "Let them try," Ava whispered. "The cameras are rolling." He met her eyes. Fear and resolve shared the same space there. "Stay back," he said, and broke free. The technicians had pried the slab open. The low hum became a tremor, the island's warning growl. "Stop!" Elijah shouted, dropping to his knees beside the hatch. "You don't understand how it breathes." But the words drowned in a roar from below. The hydrocore surged alive, blue light spilling up the stairwell like rising tide. Every compass on every ship offshore spun wildly. The air prickled with static. Drones tumbled from the sky. Sensors overwhelmed by magnetism that wasn't magnetism at all. It was resonance. Ava steadied her camera, voice trembling. "Elijah, it's responding to them." He nodded. "It's defending itself." The inspector stumbled backward as light lanced upward in a single column, pure and fluid. For a heartbeat, the sea mirrored it, glowing veins racing through waves toward the horizon. Then the sound came, low, immense, like the first note of creation stretched across the bay. It wasn't noise, it was comprehension. Elijah felt it in his bones, an ancient recognition. The machine was no longer a relic, it was awake. He shouted over the vibration, "It's aligning to the tide, don't fight it." Let it finish. But panic spread faster than reason. Orders crackled through radios. A soldier grabbed for the main cable to cut power, forgetting that the hydrocore no longer ran on their current. The instant the metal shears closed, the light burst outward, a ring expanding from the hatch like ripples from a stone dropped in water. The shock wave knocked everyone off their feet. Ava shielded her camera, still filming, as the ring widened across the island and dissipated into the sea with a sigh. Silence followed, perfect, absolute. The glow faded to a gentle shimmer inside the chamber. Elijah crawled to the edge and peered down. The hydrocore pulsed slowly, content, the blue deepening into calm. He laughed once, breathless. "It stabilized itself." The inspector, pale and shaking, stared. "What did you do?" "Listened," Elijah said simply. It was never meant to be controlled, only understood. Ava turned her lens toward him. You've just proven something no lab could replicate. He looked past her, out to the horizon, where the waves still glowed faintly under the sun. Not proven, he murmured. Reminded. The aftermath moved quickly. Scientists arrived by the dozens, some skeptical, some reverent. Reporters flooded the feeds with headlines. The machine that listens to the sea, the Brooks discovery, the energy that thinks. Government officials blustered, then compromised. Within weeks, the island was declared a protected research site, co-managed by the state and the Brooks Foundation, a legal fiction Elijah barely understood but accepted. Ava stayed. Her documentary aired a month later, a careful balance of truth and myth. Footage of the storm, the confrontation, the light blooming across the bay. It spread like rumor disguised as revelation. People called it the resonance miracle. But Elijah knew better. It wasn't a miracle, it was a conversation resumed after 100 years of silence. He rebuilt the entrance with a new seal, one that could open to those who came to learn, not to claim. The hydrocore's hum became the island's heartbeat again, measured and kind. Researchers from across the world arrived, not with blueprints, but with questions. They called the place the Brooks Institute of Marine Resonance, though Elijah refused the title of director. Caretaker's fine, he told them. It's all any of us are. At night, when the generators above ground were silent and the stars pressed close enough to touch, he would descend the familiar steps alone. The chamber was warmer now, lined with instruments and quiet monitors, yet the hydrocore remained unchanged, timeless, alive. He would rest his palm on the glass and feel the vibration travel up his arm, through his chest, into the steady drum of his heart. Sometimes he thought he heard words in that rhythm, a voice old as the tide whispering gratitude. One evening, Ava joined him, barefoot, camera forgotten. They'll try to replicate it, she said softly. Build their own, bigger, faster. They'll fail if they forget to listen first, Elijah replied. She smiled, the glow painting her face in oceanic blue. You think your great-grandfather knew this would happen? He didn't build it for us, Elijah said. He built it for the sea. We just happened to arrive in time to hear its answer. They stood together in the hum's slow pulse, the island breathing around them. Outside, the tide rose, kissing the stones that bore the name Brooks. Light threaded through the water, faint but unbroken, like the memory of a promise kept. And when the next wave rolled in, the machine and the ocean spoke the same language at last.